I remember the night they cut me out. My own blood, my own family, the company I helped build brick by brick with my bare hands. They erased my name from it like I never existed. My father looked me in the eye and said I was nothing. My brother smiled as if he had already won, and the rest of them clapped as if betrayal was a celebration. I walked out of that room, no shouting, no begging, no tears. But inside me, something broke, and something darker was born. They thought I was finished. They thought I would crawl away and vanish into the shadows. But betrayal does not destroy me. It fuels me. It sharpens me. It makes me patient. That night, I swore one thing. If they disowned me, I would take everything back. Not by screaming, not by begging, but by owning the very empire they stole. This is not a story of forgiveness. This is not a story of family love. This is a story of justice. Cold, silent, unstoppable. And if you think betrayal like this could never happen to you, you're wrong. It happens every day. It happened to me. So stay with me. Because what I did next didn't just shatter my family. It destroyed everything they thought they controlled. And if you want to hear stories like this, subscribe. You'll need it, because the next one might be worse. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, not in a mansion, not in comfort, but in the shadow of steel. My earliest memories are not of toys or games, but of sparks flying from welding torches, the sound of hammers echoing through the shop floor, the smell of burnt metal mixed with sweat. My father built a company with his bare hands, and from the time I could walk, I was there beside him. I held the flashlight while he worked late at night. I swept the dust when the machines cooled down. I thought it was more than a job. I thought it was family, because every cut on my hands felt like proof that I belonged. But the truth was buried even then. I was just too young to see it. My brother never lifted a finger, yet my father called him the future, and me, I was the shadow, the worker, the one who would never be enough. Still, I kept showing up. Still, I gave everything, because I believed loyalty meant something. But loyalty, I would learn, is only valuable until money takes its place. And when that day came, it didn't just cut me out of the company. It cut me out of the family. As I grew older, the company grew too. Bigger machines, bigger contracts, and bigger shadows. My brother Matthew wore a suit before he ever earned it. He never worked the floor, never broke a sweat, but my father looked at him like he was the sun itself. Matthew is the future, he would say, and then his eyes would turn to me, cold, measuring, like I was just a tool that had already been used up. I designed safer gears for the plant. I fixed problems before they cost a dime. I gave ideas that doubled production, but at every meeting, the credit was handed to him, to Matthew, the golden son. I remember once, after pulling 3 straight nights to finish a project, I handed my father the blueprints. He glanced at them, then passed them across the table. To Matthew, he said, as if it was his vision. That cut deeper than steel ever could. Because it wasn't just about business, it was about worth. It was about blood, and in his eyes, mine wasn't worth much at all. Still, I swallowed it. Still, I worked harder. Because I told myself, one day he'll see. One day my father will see me. But that day never came. And when the betrayal finally arrived, it was far worse than anything I had imagined. The day came in spring. Cleveland was waking up after a long winter, but inside the boardroom, the air was colder than ice. I walked in wearing the same work jacket I always wore. Grease stains, calloused hands, proof of years no one else would claim. At the head of the table sat my father. On his right, my brother Matthew, in a brand new tailored suit. The rest of the family filled the seats, smiling as if it was a wedding. Then my father cleared his throat. "Daniel," he said, not even looking at me, "you're no longer a part of this company." I froze. I thought I had misheard, but then he kept talking. This company belongs to Matthew now. He is the future. You are the past. The words echoed like a hammer against steel. I glanced around. Some looked away. Others clapped. And Matthew? He smiled, wide, satisfied, as if he had finally killed me without lifting a hand. My chest burned, but I stayed silent. No shouting, no begging, no tears. I stood up, walked to the door, and with every step, I left behind decades of sweat and loyalty. They thought I was broken. They thought it was over. But silence is not surrender. Silence is the sound before the storm. I walked out of that boardroom. Not a word, not a sound. Just the weight of every stare pressing down on my back. The hallways smelled of fresh paint, but to me it reeked of betrayal. Every step echoed like a verdict. Final. Cold. I passed the photographs on the wall. Generations of harassed men smiling beside steel beams and factory floors. My face would never be on that wall. Not anymore. Outside, the Cleveland sky was gray, heavy with rain. I stood there for a long time, hands clenched, jaw tight, and then I let out a breath. They thought I was done. They thought silence meant surrender. But silence is not surrender. It is strategy. It is patience sharpening into a blade. I drove my old truck back across town. The streets I had known since childhood blurred past me. Bars, factories, empty lots. Every corner whispered the same truth. They had erased me. But erasing me was their mistake, because a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous man of all. I parked outside my small apartment. Rust on the door, a single bulb flickering in the hall. It wasn't much, but it was the place where their empire would start to fall. And as I turned the key, I swore to myself, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the storm. I didn't sleep that night. The rain hit my window like hammers, every drop reminding me they thought I was nothing. But I had one thing left: knowledge. I knew how the company worked, who was frustrated, who was tired of being ignored, who wanted out. So I started small. Phone calls to cousins who held a few shares, quiet meetings in diners on the east side of Cleveland, coffee-stained contracts, shaky hands sliding papers across the table. Most of them laughed. Daniel, what are you doing with scraps? I just smiled, because scraps add up. And piece by piece, I was taking back what they thought was theirs. One cousin sold me his shares to pay off debt. An aunt cashed out because she didn't trust Matthew's leadership. Every deal was another brick pulled from their foundation. And the best part? No one noticed. Not my father, not my brother. They thought I had vanished. But in the shadows, I was building something stronger than steel, a weapon made of silence, paper, and patience. Each signature was fuel. Each deal was a spark. And I knew, when the fire finally burned, it would consume them from the inside. I closed my folder of contracts, slid it into a drawer, and whispered to myself, they disowned me, but I'm buying them back, one piece at a time. Weeks passed. I moved in silence, collecting scraps, building my weapon one signature at a time. But word travels fast in Cleveland, and soon, whispers reached Matthew. One Friday night, there was a family gathering. Not for me, never for me. But I went anyway. Sometimes you need to stand in the fire just to remember the heat. The moment I walked through the door, the room shifted. Laughter turned sharper. Eyes turned colder. Matthew raised his glass. Look who decided to show up, he said. The man who thinks scraps will make him a king. The room erupted. Aunts, uncles, even cousins I once trusted, all laughing, all pointing. I stood there holding a drink I hadn't even touched. My hands didn't shake, my face didn't crack. I just let them laugh, because what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every insult was another nail in their coffin. Matthew leaned close, whispering so only I could hear, "You'll die with nothing, Daniel. Nothing." I met his eyes, and for the first time, he saw something he didn't expect. Calm, cold, unbreakable. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, Because silence cuts deeper than words, and in that silence, I promised myself he would regret every laugh. The night after that gathering, I came home late. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. Her shoes weren't by the door, her coat wasn't on the chair. And then, I saw it. An empty closet, every dress, every memory, gone. I sat on the bed, staring at the silence she left behind. The note was short, cruel in its simplicity. Daniel, I can't do this anymore. Matthew can give me the life you never will. Matthew, my own brother. First they stole my company, now he stole my wife. The glass in my hand shattered. Blood dripped down my palm, but I didn't feel pain. Not anymore. I walked to the window. Cleveland's lights flickered in the distance. The factories. The skyline I helped build. All of it felt like a stage. And I was the fool they laughed off of it. For hours I sat in that room. No tears, no screams, just silence. But inside, something hardened. If losing my wife was the price, then I had nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose is the man you should fear most. After she left, I stopped being Daniel the husband. I stopped being Daniel the son. I became Daniel the ghost. Days blurred into nights. I worked 2 jobs, factory shifts by day, repair work by night, oil on my hands, dust in my lungs, money in my pocket. It wasn't much, but it was fuel. Every paycheck became another weapon, another step closer to tearing them down. I lived in silence. Neighbors barely saw me. Friends stopped calling. I didn't care, because loneliness doesn't hurt when rage keeps you company. At night, I spread papers across my kitchen table, contracts, share certificates, deals scribbled on napkins from diners across Cleveland. I tracked every number, every percentage, every weak spot in their empire. I slept on a torn couch beside those papers because they were my new family, and they would not betray me. There were moments of doubt, moments I looked in the mirror and wondered if I was losing myself. But then I saw her empty closet. I heard my father's words. I saw Matthew's smile, and I remembered I wasn't lost. I was rebuilding. Not a home, not a marriage, but a fire. A fire big enough to burn down everything they ever stole. The first strike came quietly. No warning, no noise, just a signature. I had been working with a contact from Chicago, a logistics firm, big, hungry, desperate for a breakthrough. They wanted steel, reliable, affordable, and I had the designs, the same designs I once handed to my father, the ones he gave to Matthew. But this time, they weren't stolen. This time, they were mine. We met in a diner off Euclid Avenue. No boardrooms, no suits, just coffee cups, a stack of papers, and my steady hand. When the pen touched the page, I felt it. The shift. The weight of years of silence turning into action. By the end of the week, headlines spread across Cleveland. Harris Steel loses multi-million-dollar contract to competitor. They didn't know the competitor was me. Not yet. I sat alone in my apartment, the news glowing from the TV. Matthew's face appeared on the screen, red with anger, eyes darting. I leaned back in my chair, the corners of my mouth pulling into the first real smile in years. Because the empire that had cast me out was starting to crack, and this was only the first strike. The fallout was immediate. The Harris boardroom, once full of smug smiles, was now filled with shouting. Reports slammed onto the table. Millions lost. Suppliers pulling back. Shareholders demanding answers. And Matthew? He was unraveling. His voice cracked. His hands shook. "This is sabotage," he roared. "Someone is bleeding us dry." But they were looking in the wrong direction. They searched for enemies in Chicago. They blamed rivals in Detroit. They never once looked at me. Not at Daniel, the ghost they had erased. Meanwhile, I was already 2 steps ahead. Another deal signed. Another contract stolen from under their noses. Another piece of their empire slipping through my hands and into mine. I watched from my apartment as the evening news played clips of Matthew storming out of a shareholders meeting. His tie crooked, his face red, his words empty. I took a slow sip of coffee. because chaos is loud, but revenge is quiet, calculated, patient. Every crack in their foundation widened. Every laugh they once threw at me came back like an echo. But now it was my turn to smile. And as their walls began to crumble, I whispered to myself, they're searching for a phantom, and they'll never see the ghost standing right in front of them. It happened on a Tuesday morning. The Harris board met again, desperate to stop the bleeding. Lawyers, bankers, shareholders, all waiting for answers. Matthew walked in, his face pale. My father followed, his shoulders heavy. The empire they had stolen was cracking. Then the door opened, and I walked in. Not in grease-stained work clothes, not as the shadow they once ignored, but in a simple suit, calm, silent. The room froze, murmurs spread. What is he doing here? I set a folder on the table, dozens of contracts, share certificates, all signed, all mine. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, his voice shaking. Effective today. Daniel Harris holds controlling interest in Harris Steel. The silence was heavier than steel. My father's eyes widened. Matthew's jaw dropped. The same mouths that once laughed at me had nothing left to say. I didn't gloat. I didn't shout. I just looked at Matthew and whispered, "You called me nothing. Now I own everything." The board erupted, some in disbelief, some in panic. But me? I felt nothing. Just the quiet weight of justice settling into place. And yet, this was only the surface, because the real betrayal, the one that would destroy them, was still to come. Owning the company was only the beginning. The real weapon had been waiting for years. I pulled another folder from my briefcase. This one heavier, darker. Inside were documents, old tax filings, hidden ledgers, forms my father once shoved in front of me late at night. "Sign this, Daniel," he used to say. "Don't ask questions." Back then, I trusted him. Back then, I thought obedience meant loyalty. But those papers weren't harmless. They were cover-ups, fraud, evidence of money laundered through my name. I laid them on the table, page after page. The lawyer's face went pale. The shareholders leaned in, whispering like frightened children. And then I spoke. "You didn't just betray me. You used me. You made me the shield for your crimes. Not anymore." I handed copies to the IRS investigator waiting in the hallway. Yes, I had called them. I wanted them here to see the truth with their own eyes. My father's hand shook. Matthew shouted, "This is lies! Fabricated!" But no one believed him. The papers spoke louder than his voice ever could. The board was in chaos. The Harris Empire wasn't just stolen. It was rotting. And now the rot was exposed. For years, they buried me under silence. Now, I was the one burying them, under the weight of their own sins. The boardroom was chaos. Papers scattered, voices cracked. The family that once laughed at me was crumbling in front of my eyes. My father sat hunched, his hands trembling, his empire slipping through his fingers. Matthew paced like a caged animal, screaming at lawyers who no longer listened. And me? I sat, calm, silent. The chairman's seat, the one I had never been allowed to touch, was mine now. I pulled the chair back. The leather creaked under my weight, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the shadow. I was the fire. I looked at Matthew, his face red, his chest heaving. "You disowned me," I said quietly. "But now, I own everything." The words landed like steel against stone, final, unshakable. Silence swept the room. No laughter, no mockery, only the sound of power shifting forever. I rested my hands on the table, the same table where I was once erased, and I whispered to myself, "This isn't revenge. This is justice." But deep down, I knew justice has a cost, and victory. Victory never tastes as sweet as you dream it will. The throne was mine, but so was the silence, and silence was the only crown I ever wanted. The boardroom emptied. Chairs pushed back, doors slammed shut. The empire was mine, but the silence was louder than any victory. I stayed behind, alone. The city lights of Cleveland flickered through the tall windows, steel towers, smoke rising from chimneys. All of it felt hollow. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an old photograph. My mother. Her smile soft, her hand stained with flour from the bakery she once ran. The only person who ever told me I was enough. I placed the photo on the chairman's table, the same table where my father had cut me out, and I whispered, "This wasn't revenge, Mom. This was justice. For you. For me." My voice cracked for the first time in years, not from weakness, but from release, because I realized something in that moment. Winning didn't erase the scars. Owning the company didn't heal the betrayal. It just stopped it from spreading. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the empty room. The leather creaked beneath me. The silence pressed in. And for the first time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't humiliated. I was free. The throne was mine, but more than that, the chains were gone. I sat there in silence. The empire was mine. The throne was mine. But victory never tastes as sweet as you dream it will. Because in the end, revenge doesn't erase the scars. It just teaches you to live with them, to own them, to turn pain into power. And maybe that's what justice really is. Not about smiling in triumph, not about standing over the ruins, but about knowing they can never hurt you again. I wonder sometimes, have you ever felt that kind of betrayal? Not from strangers, not from rivals, but from the people who were supposed to protect you. Your own blood, your own family. What would you have done? Would you have walked away? Or would you have fought back, like I did? I want to hear your story. Share it in the comments. Maybe someone else needs to hear it. Maybe your story becomes their strength. And if you want more stories like this, stories of betrayal, justice, and quiet revenge, subscribe. Not because I'm asking, but because the next story might just be the one that mirrors your own. This was my silence, my storm, my justice. Now it's your turn.